Subscribe to Wild West Soul Stories. Hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching. The wooden spoon cracked against Eliza Mae's shoulder blade, with enough force to send her stumbling into the kitchen wall. She caught herself against the rough timber, swallowing the cry that wanted to escape her throat. She had learned long ago that crying only made things worse. "Useless girl," her mother Harriet hissed, her face twisted with the same bitter rage that had defined Eliza's entire 19 years of life. "Can't even boil water without burning something. Your father should have taken you with him when he left." Eliza said nothing. There was nothing to say. Her father had disappeared when she was 7 years old, leaving behind a wife whose heart had turned to stone and a daughter who became the target of every disappointment, every frustration, every ounce of hatred Harriet carried in her soul. The year was 1879, and the small town of Copper Ridge, Wyoming, sat nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to touch the heavens. It was a town of miners and merchants, of women who gossiped behind lace curtains, and men who worked themselves into early graves. And it was a town that knew about Harriet Bennett's heavy hand, but chose to look the other way. Eliza carried bruises beneath her calico dress the way other women carried secrets, hidden, shameful, permanent fixtures of her existence. She finished washing the dishes in silence while her mother retreated to the parlor with a bottle of whiskey that had become her constant companion. By the time darkness fell over Copper Ridge, Harriet would be unconscious in her chair, and Eliza would have a few precious hours of peace. The next morning brought the weekly trip to the general store, a task Eliza both dreaded and cherished. Dreaded because the townspeople looked at her with pity or judgment, never quite meeting her eyes. Cherished because it meant an hour away from the small house that felt more like a prison than a home. She walked the dusty main street with her basket over her arm, keeping her head down as she passed the saloon and the blacksmith. The general store sat at the end of the street, its weathered sign creaking in the mountain breeze. That was when she first saw him. He stood near the counter, a man built like the mountains themselves, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled at his collar and a beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His clothes were worn but clean, the clothes of a man who worked with his hands. But it was his eyes that stopped Eliza in her tracks. They were the color of pine needles after rain, green with flecks of gold, and they held a quietness that seemed to fill the entire store. He was purchasing supplies, flour, salt, coffee, rope, the items of a man who lived far from town, who needed nothing from society but these basic provisions. Eliza moved past him to gather her own items, painfully aware of how close she had to stand in the narrow aisle. She reached for a tin of beans on the upper shelf, and her sleeve pulled back just enough to reveal the purple bruises circling her wrist like a bracelet of pain. She yanked her sleeve down immediately, her heart racing with the familiar panic of exposure. But when she glanced up, those green eyes were watching her, not with pity, not with judgment, with something that looked almost like recognition. He said nothing, simply picked up his supplies and walked out of the store, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Eliza didn't see him again for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Harriet's rages grew worse. The whiskey was running low, and money was tight. Eliza bore the brunt of her mother's fury, learning to move through the house like a ghost, to anticipate the swing of a hand or the crash of a thrown plate. On a Thursday evening, when the autumn air had turned sharp with the promise of winter, Harriet threw Eliza out of the house entirely. "Don't come back until you've earned your keep," her mother screamed from the doorway. "Maybe spend some time at the saloon like your father always wanted. That's all you're good for anyway." The door slammed shut, and Eliza stood alone on the porch in nothing but her thin dress, the temperature dropping with every passing minute. She had no money, no coat, and nowhere to go. The respectable families of Copper Ridge would not open their doors to Harriet Bennett's daughter. The saloon offered warmth, but at a price Eliza was not willing to pay, so she walked, She walked until the lights of town faded behind her, and the road became nothing more than a dirt path climbing into the mountains. She walked until her feet ached and her teeth chattered, and the stars overhead seemed close enough to touch. She walked because stopping meant freezing, and some small part of her still wanted to live, still believed that somewhere in this vast and indifferent world there might be something worth surviving for. She collapsed at the edge of a creek, her body finally giving out beneath the weight of exhaustion and cold. The water rushed past, black and silver in the moonlight, and Eliza thought that perhaps this was how her story would end. Alone on a mountain, forgotten by everyone, mourned by no one. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was warm. Firelight danced across rough wooden walls. Heavy blankets covered her body, and the smell of wood and pine and something cooking filled her nose. For a moment, Eliza thought she had died and somehow stumbled into heaven. Then she saw him. The man from the general store sat in a chair near the fire, his large hands wrapped around a tin cup. He was watching her with those quiet green eyes, patient as the mountains themselves. "You're awake," he said. His voice was deep and unhurried, like a river running over smooth stones. Eliza sat up too quickly, her head spinning. "Where? How?" "Found you by Miller's Creek," he said. "Another hour in that cold and you wouldn't have woken up at all." She looked around the cabin. It was small but solid, built with the care of a man who valued craftsmanship over speed. A single room held everything: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and shelves lined with books that surprised her. A rifle hung above the door, and dried herbs dangled from the ceiling beams. "I'm Samuel Holbrook," he said. "Most call me Sam when they call me anything at all. But that's rare enough. Don't get many visitors up here." "Eliza," she whispered. "Eliza Mae Bennett." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Bennett, your mother runs the boarding house in town." Eliza flinched at the mention of her mother, an involuntary reaction that Sam's sharp eyes did not miss. "You're safe here," he said simply. "No one's going to hurt you in my home." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But 19 years of pain had taught her that safety was an illusion, that kindness always came with conditions, that gentle words were often followed by violent hands. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. "Because I know what it is to be left out in the cold, and I know what it is to carry marks that others pretend not to see." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal scars that crisscrossed his forearm. Old scars, faded white with time, but unmistakable in their origin. Someone had hurt this man too, long ago, and he had survived it. "My father," he said quietly, "until I was 15 years old. Then I left and never looked back." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks before she could stop them. For the first time in her life, someone understood. Someone looked at her and saw not a burden or a victim, but a survivor, a kindred spirit marked by the same invisible wounds. Sam didn't move to comfort her. He seemed to understand that touch, even well-meaning touch, was not what she needed. Instead, he poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the table near her. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "No conditions, no expectations, just stay." She stayed. The first week was the hardest. Eliza kept waiting for Sam's kindness to reveal itself as manipulation, for his patience to give way to anger. She flinched when he moved too quickly. She apologized constantly, for everything, for nothing. She made herself small and silent, trying to disappear into the walls of his cabin, the way she had learned to disappear in her mother's house. But Sam never raised his voice, never raised his hand. He gave her space when she needed it, and company when the silence grew too heavy. He taught her how to chop wood and set snares for rabbits. He shared his books with her, reading aloud by firelight when her eyes grew tired. And slowly, like ice thawing in spring, Eliza began to heal. 1 month passed, then 2. The first heavy snows of winter sealed them in the mountain, making trips to town impossible. Eliza found she didn't mind. The cabin that had seemed so small at first now felt like the entire world, and it was a world that held no cruelty. She began to notice things about Sam that she hadn't seen before. The way he hummed while he worked, the gentle way he handled the small animals that wandered near the cabin, setting out scraps for them even when food was scarce. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was rare but genuine. She noticed the breadth of his shoulders and the strength of his hands, and the way her heart stuttered when he looked at her. Not with hunger, but with something softer, something that felt like reverence. One evening, as they sat by the fire while a blizzard raged outside, Sam asked her about her dreams. "No one has ever asked me that," Eliza said softly. "Then tell me," he replied. "Tell me everything you've never been allowed to say." And she did. She told him about the books she wanted to read and the places she wanted to see. She told him about the garden she had always dreamed of planting and the dress she wanted to sew someday, blue like the summer sky. She told him about the life she had imagined for herself in the dark hours of the night when her mother's cruelty had left her bleeding and broken. Sam listened to every word, and when she finished, he took her hand in his, the first time he had touched her since carrying her unconscious body to his cabin all those weeks ago. "You deserve all of it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every dream, every hope. You deserve to be loved the way you've never been loved." Eliza looked at their joined hands, his so large and scarred, hers so small and healing. "I don't know what love feels like," she admitted. "Real love, not the kind that hurts." Sam raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, so gentle it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Then let me show you," he whispered. "If you'll let me. I'll spend the rest of my life showing you." That night, for the first time in her life, Eliza fell asleep feeling completely safe. Sam's arm was around her, his heartbeat steady against her back, and the blizzard outside could not touch them. Spring came slowly to the mountain, melting the snow and filling the creek with rushing water. Eliza had transformed during those winter months. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, replaced by a light that Sam told her was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She planted the garden she had always dreamed of. Sam built her raised beds from fallen timber, and together they turned the soil and buried seeds that would grow into vegetables and herbs and flowers. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, two souls who had found in each other the understanding they had searched for their entire lives. One morning in May, Sam knelt in the garden among the newly sprouted seedlings and asked Eliza to marry him. There was no ring. He apologized for that, his eyes downcast with shame. But Eliza took his face in her hands and kissed him with all the love that had bloomed in her heart over the long winter. "I don't need a ring," she told him. "I just need you. I just need this life we're building together." They married in the meadow behind the cabin, with only the mountains as witnesses. Sam spoke vows he had written himself, promises to protect her and cherish her and love her until his last breath. Eliza spoke her own vows through tears of joy, promising to stand beside him through every storm, to be his partner in all things, to love him with every piece of her healed and healing heart. That night, as husband and wife, they learned each other in ways that went beyond words. Sam was infinitely gentle, treating Eliza's body like something precious, something sacred, and Eliza discovered that touch could be tender, that intimacy could be an act of healing rather than violence. She wept afterward, and Sam held her close and whispered that he loved her, again and again, until the tears were washed away. The summer brought word from town that Harriet Bennett had died. The whiskey had finally claimed her, leaving behind a house full of debts and a daughter who was not mentioned in any will. Sam asked Eliza if she wanted to go back, to claim what might be left of her former life. She shook her head. "There's nothing for me there," she said. Everything I need is right here. They never spoke of Harriet again. The years unfolded like a quilt being stitched to death. Each day adding a new patch to the tapestry of their life. They built a second room onto the cabin, then a third. They raised chickens and goats and a dog named Bear, who followed Eliza everywhere she went. And in the spring of their third year together, Eliza gave birth to a daughter. She was small and perfect, with her father's green eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Hope because that was what she represented. Hope for a future untainted by the past. Hope for a love that would break the cycle of cruelty. Hope for a life filled with gentleness instead of pain. Sam held his daughter in his large, gentle hands and wept. "I will never hurt you," he promised the tiny infant. "I will never let anyone hurt you. You will know only kindness, only love, only the best of what this world can offer." Eliza watched her husband with their child, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This man who had found her dying in the cold, who had asked nothing of her but had given her everything. This man who had shown her that love was not a weapon but a shelter. This man who had taken her from a life of daily pain and given her a life she never could have imagined. She thought of the girl she had been, the broken thing who had collapsed by Miller's Creek expecting to die. That girl would never have believed that such happiness was possible. That girl would never have believed that she deserved to be loved. But Eliza knew now. She knew it with every fiber of her being. She deserved this life. She deserved this love. She had survived the darkness, and she had found the light. And it had been waiting for her all along, in the quiet green eyes of a Mounta, in man who had looked at her bruises and seen not damage but possibility, not a victim but a survivor, not someone to pity but someone to love. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Eliza stood on the porch of her home. Sam joined her, their daughter cradled in his arms, and together they watched the day give way to night. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. Sam looked at her with all the love in his vast and gentle heart. "For what? For saving me, for loving me, for showing me what life could be." Sam wrapped his free arm around his wife and pulled her close. "You saved yourself, Eliza. You were strong enough to survive until I could find you. All I did was offer you a place to heal. Everything else you did on your own." She leaned into his warmth, into the safety of his embrace, and smiled. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to a love story written in scars and healing, in pain and redemption, in the quiet courage of two broken souls who had found wholeness in each other, and in the cabin on the mountain, where firelight danced and books lined the walls, and a garden grew wild and beautiful. A family lived in peace. A family built not on blood but on choice. A family built not on obligation but on love. A family that would endure, generation after generation. A testament to the truth that even the most wounded heart can learn to beat again. Eliza Mae Holbrook never forgot the girl she had been. She carried those memories like embers in her chest, reminders of how far she had come. But she no longer let them define her. She was not a victim anymore. She was a survivor, a wife, a mother. She was loved, and that made all the difference.